This mother has been charged with strangling her 3 young children. Her lawyers blame postpartum depression, and her husband is standing by her. But prosecutors say she knew exactly what she was doing.
On the evening of January 24, 2023, Duxbury resident Lindsay Clancy strangled all 3 of her children. She is currently held without bail and in a paralyzed state. What is the story here? Join us as we take a deep dive into the Lindsay Clancy case with a little background of the story. Born in 1990, Lindsay Clancy spent most of her early life in Wallingford, Connecticut. She was a bright and bubbly girl. She completed high school, college, and eventually moved on to become a nurse at a hospital in Massachusetts. At some point, she met and got married to Patrick Clancy. They lived in Duxbury, 43 minutes south of Boston, and started a beautiful family together. The couple had 3 children, Cora, Dawson, and Cowan. Cora was 5, Dawson was 3, and sweet little Cowan was only about 8 months old when this tragic event occurred. Now to more significant events leading up to the crime. On the 24th of January, 2023, Lindsay took Cora to a pediatrician's appointment. When they got home, she played with Cora and Dawson outside. It was a seemingly ordinary and happy evening. They even built a snowman. Lindsay even sent photos of the children playing to Patrick and her mother. Again, texting photographs was something she always did, so nobody would ever have imagined what would have happened next. At 4:02 p.m., she searched for kids, Miralax on her phone. At 4:13 p.m., she searched for Takeout 3V, a restaurant in Plymouth, Massachusetts. At 4:47 p.m., she searched for CVS and called the store in Kingston to inquire about children's Miralax. At 4:53 p.m., Lindsay texted Patrick again. This time, asking if he wanted takeout from 3V. Patrick was actually working in the basement of their home. So it was not until 5:06 p.m. that Patrick texted back yes to her request.
Her 5-year-old daughter, Cora's nutrition. She was able to play with Cora and Dawson, 3-year-old son, in the backyard that day. She was able to take care of Helen Clancy, her 8-month-old child, without any problems or concerns that day. She was also able to call CVS, her local CVS manager there, for Cora without any problems. She was able to select a place for dinner online, a 3-week restaurant. She was able to communicate that to her.
At 5:15 p.m. they finalized their order, and Patrick left to pick up the food and the children's medication from CVS. He arrived at CVS at 5:32 p.m. and left 5 minutes later. He then picked up the takeout order at the 3V restaurant at 5:54 p.m. Now, while Patrick was busy running errands, Lindsay was back home with the kids, and in that time, she strangled all 3 children with exercise bands. Tragically, Cora and Dawson died immediately. Notably, at the time the kids were found, little Cowan was gravely injured and rushed to the hospital. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 days later. Truly horrific and unimaginable, but let us back up a bit and take this from Patrick Clancy's point of view. Patrick returned home at 6:09 p.m., grossly unaware of what must have happened while he was away. The entire house was silent. Not a sound from the kids, and nothing from Lindsay as well. He called out for Lindsay, but there was no response. He soon discovered that the bedroom door on the 2nd floor was locked, and this was when he got really alarmed. He called 911 at 6:11 p.m. While still moving around, he spotted blood on the floor and an open window. Patrick was still on the phone with the operator when he found Lindsay injured on the ground in the backyard. At this point, Lindsay said something very disturbing.
Inside and found Clancy on the ground underneath the window that she had gone out of. She had cuts on her wrists and neck that were no longer actively bleeding. He called 911 and they asked him to put pressure on it. The wound, he said it wasn't necessary because they weren't bleeding.
She told him that their children were in the basement. Unprepared for what he would find, Patrick rushed to the basement and found his children in terrible condition. After the alleged attack, Lindsay escaped through a 2nd-story window and sustained severe injuries upon landing. Shortly after, Lindsay was taken to a hospital for treatment due to severe injuries to her spine.
Being a paraplegic, paralyzed, she can't move. Can't get off the bed. She can't walk. She can't even go to the bathroom. She has to have 24/7 medical care. We all know that this woman is, as counsel concedes apparently, a danger to herself. I question whether she would ever make it to a trial. She's suicidal. She's extremely emotional.
She was then charged with murder by strangulation or suffocation, as well as assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Her first appearance in court was on the 26th of October 2023, and her next appearance is scheduled for the 15th of December 2023. Notably, Lindsay Clancy pleaded not guilty to the charges against her and is currently being held without bail and also receiving psychiatric care. According to the court documents, she allegedly used Apple Maps on her phone to determine when it would take someone to travel from her home to 3V.
She was also able to check Apple Maps, where she was able to determine how long it would take her husband to get from her house to the restaurant and back, so she would know how long he would be gone approximately. She then sent her husband off to CVS with medication and to the restaurant. Patrick left the house that evening at 5:15 p.m. He said goodbye to his wife, he kissed his children. He returned home at 6:09 p.m. He was only gone for 54 minutes.
Court documents also point out that Patrick had told law enforcement that Clancy had seen a psychiatrist multiple times. It was also proven that Lindsay was prescribed medications like Valium and Zoloft. There was evidence that she might have been suffering from withdrawals from benzodiazepines, which are depressants that produce sedation and hypnosis in the process of relieving anxiety, muscle spasms, and seizures. Another detail that we learned from the court documents is that investigators took blood and urine samples from Lindsay Clancy, as well as swabs underneath her fingernails. Swabs and tests like these are routinely taken to analyze DNA related to the crime. In this case of strangulation, there is a high chance that DNA will be left under the fingernails of the suspect or victims, as well as the exercise cords used to commit the crime. Following that is a toxicology screen. This was most likely done to reveal what medication she was on. Aside from that, the toxicology screen would determine if she took the prescribed amount or not, whether she took too little or too much, as well as the possible outcome of all the medication interacting together. This test could give insight as to whether or not she could have been psychotic. The court documents also revealed some things about the autopsy reports.
To get to the children, get them into ambulances, bring them to the hospital. 4 in Dawson are declared suspect at the hospital. They died from asphyxiation. Callan was med-flighted to Boston Children's Hospital because they were able to get a pulse, but unfortunately he was brain dead and he got off life support 7 days later and died from complications from asphyxiation.
For Cora and Dawson, there were small bruises on the right arm and both sides of both legs. There were heavy lungs and ligatures around the neck, but somehow there was no evidence of blunt force trauma. Temple Law School professor Jules Epstein sat with Jesse Weber of the Law and Crime Network and shed a little light on the nature of the injuries. According to Epstein, the injuries sustained by the kids are a common sign following some sort of strangulation. When constricting the flow of blood, little marks will appear on the eyes.
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, is a common sign following some sort of strangulation. So, and I'm probably going to describe this wrong, but as we're constricting the flow of blood, there are little marks that show up in the eyes. The bruises, we're going to have to see where they line up. If they line up with the child being held down or grabbed, I mean, kids get bruises.
Yep.
But these ones, we'd have to say, what do they match up with? I have no idea. And I don't want to have to think about it or ask your listeners to have to think about it.
It is too horrific to imagine, but this paints the picture that Lindsay managed to strangle the kids without much struggling and scratching them. The court documents also point to evidence that Patrick was definitely not there when the killings took place. The authorities found evidence to corroborate his story as they found surveillance footage of the CVS where he was at the time. Lindsay has since hired an attorney who is defending her based on 2 arguments. The first argument is that she was given too many medications, which impaired her ability to distinguish right from wrong, while the second is that she may have had postpartum psychosis, a rare condition that causes hallucinations and delusions in women who have recently given birth Because this is making out to be an important factor in this case, let us analyze the potential culpability, the concept of postpartum psychosis, and how all of it could possibly play out in this case. We will begin with the numbers. The case of a parent killing their child makes up only 3% of homicide arrests in the United States. Typically, the profile of a mother committing a crime like this is usually a very young, poorly educated, and unmarried woman. However, Lindsay Clancy does not fit any of these criteria. She is over 30 years old, a nurse who received a quality education, and lastly, she was married, some would even say happily. So, for cases involving an outlier like Lindsay Clancy, there are usually three main motives behind such crimes. The first is inconvenience, and it occurs when a mother feels like caring for the child has become a burden. The second motive is altruism. This one may be hard to comprehend, but some people actually kill their children because of a misguided belief that it is the right thing to do. Lastly, psychosis. Put simply, psychosis involves a break from reality. It mostly occurs as a result of a mental illness, but sometimes certain drugs and medications can lead to psychosis. It does look like Lindsay Clancy's defense seems bent on establishing the fact that postpartum depression is a pivotal factor in this case. Research shows that postpartum psychosis is often connected to postpartum depression. Around 50 to 80% of new mothers experience postpartum depression. This condition is typically characterized by mood swings, irritability, changes in appetite, feelings of inadequacy, and anxiety about caring for their children. Women with postpartum depression often see themselves as bad mothers. Now, 0.2% of new mothers dealing with postpartum depression experience postpartum psychosis. Not an alarming statistic, but this severe condition can lead to hallucinations, delusions, disorientation, and extreme emotional volatility. In fact, children of mothers with untreated postpartum psychosis have a 4% risk of being murdered in their first year of life. With these numbers in mind, let us take another look at the available evidence, beginning with the incriminating factors in Lindsay's case. There is no doubt that Lindsay Clancy caused the death of her 3 children. Even her defense cannot dispute this. After the whole incident went down, one of the first things Lindsay said, or rather asked, was if she needed an attorney. This was on the 27th of January, 3 days after the crime. Now, this question is an indication that she had an understanding that her actions were wrong. During a mental health evaluation, Lindsay confessed to her husband that a voice compelled her to kill. Unfortunately for her case, her husband had already mentioned that she had never reported hearing voices prior to the killings. He also noted that she had never used the word psychosis until her first evaluation by the defense's mental health clinician. Next up, Lindsay diligently recorded her daily activities, mental state, and medication usage in a detailed journal. The prosecution could very well argue that her writing was too clear and precise.
Her writing was clear and precise and articulate. In one journal, she's even leaving notes for the nanny. Her 2 older children were going to school 4 days a week, and they had a nanny to help with the baby. And she wrote very clear and detailed instructions for the nanny in that journal. In these notes and journals, she always appears to know who she is, where she is, what's going on, what's happening. There's no disordered thoughts or speech.
A writing found to be clear and precise can be used as evidence against Lindsay Clancy because it shows no indication of hallucinations, delusions, or any mental disorder. As expected, the prosecution claimed that Lindsay had been assessed before the incident and was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, but not postpartum depression. Now, the day before the killings, Lindsay mentioned in her journal that she had some postpartum anxiety about returning to work.
She did write the day before killing her children that she had, quote, a touch of postpartum anxiety, end quote, around returning to work. She talks about her psychiatrist prescribing medication to help her. She was initially diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. She was then evaluated at Women and Infant Center for Women's Behavioral Health in Rhode Island, who determined that she did not appear to have postpartum depression and told her to seek the help of a generalized psychologist.
Similarly, a couple of actions leading up to the killings suggested premeditation. These actions included checking travel times to ensure her husband would be away from home long enough to do what she wanted. You could also argue that it was weird for her to order from that particular restaurant in the first place. There is proof that she had ordered from there before, but it was more common for her to order takeout from much closer restaurants. The defense also tried to fly a theory of overmedication. The evidence available suggests that Lindsay Clancy was only taking 3 medications at the time of the killings. Going back a little, she had been on 13 different medications within the past 8 months. But being on 3 at that time is not enough grounds to argue that she was over-medicated. It simply is not a particularly high number of medications to be prescribed. There is nothing out of the ordinary about it. Notably, some states have this concept of what's called involuntary intoxication. This applies to cases where a defendant was taking medication that the doctor ordered. We don't mean going out and buying heroin and other kinds of hard drugs on the street corner. We mean actual medication that the doctor prescribed. Now, that medication, through no fault of your own, can sometimes create that psychotic state. This could be what the defense is going for. All this seems very damning on the first look, but this case is not so simple. Let us move on to the exonerating and exculpatory evidence, and analyze just how possible it is that Lindsay Clancy is not the outright monster that she appears to be. It is worth noting that Lindsay Clancy made several voluntary efforts to address her mental health symptoms. She had discussed harmful thoughts towards her children with her husband and was more than willing to get better. We are not behavioral experts, but if she really wanted to kill her children, she most likely would not have been giving her husband such an alarming sign that something was wrong. She also may not have voluntarily checked herself into a mental health facility a couple of times if she really wanted to kill her children. In fact, she had just been discharged from one of such facilities a few days before the heartbreaking incident. She had checked into the mental health facility at Belmont on the 1st of January 2023, and by the 5th of January, she was discharged. Investigators found out that she had expressed that she no longer had those negative thoughts towards her children. While it seems that Lindsay planned the killings in advance, it is possible that she experienced a rapid onset of psychotic symptoms, which can occur suddenly and without warning. Ideal warning signs of psychosis include agitation, talking incoherently, especially about something deluded, and aggression. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, and sometimes a psychotic break really can just spring out of nowhere. Strangling her children was considered to be a highly unusual behavior for Lindsay Clancy, and that is according to everyone who knew her personally. This would actually support the idea that she may have been psychotic at the time of the killings. We found it truly heartbreaking when we learnt that several letters of support were submitted to the court, all describing Lindsay Clancy as compassionate, empathetic, kind, and selfless. Could it really be that Lindsay Clancy snapped and did not mean to kill her children? Based on the available evidence, we can say that it will be difficult to determine Lindsay's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. We believe that it would be easy to argue that Lindsay was experiencing psychosis because she had psychotic tendencies that had not been adequately attended to. Then, of course, the suicide attempt afterwards. Both sides of the court can play with that. The prosecution could argue that it was all part of a sinister plan. They could say Lindsay simply could not stand her life or the children and decided that she was going to end it all by taking her life right after she took theirs. The other way it could go is that the defense argues that the suicide attempt was the result of grief and remorse. When the psychotic break had worn off, she could have felt crippling regret and confusion at why she had done such a terrible thing. Then again, there is this popular assumption that when a person knows what they did is illegal, they will try to escape punishment by committing suicide, and when this happens, then they are not really insane and, by extension, cannot be innocent of the crime. But what a lot of people forget is that if such a person was motivated by their delusion, then the case of guilty or not is not so easy to determine. Notably, insanity is not a 24/7 condition in the eyes of the law. There are concepts relating to insanity and temporary insanity, but interestingly, there is no such thing as non-temporary or permanent insanity. Insanity truly matters at the time the crime is in progress. So, in the eyes of the law, somebody can actually be normal, calm, rational, and then have that psychotic break. This will be seen as the period of insanity. For Lindsay Clancy, postpartum depression can be a legal defense in the same way insanity could be a defense. What this means is that a jury could find her not guilty based on postpartum depression. If this happens, she will receive medical and mental health treatment, rather than going to prison. When examining the motives behind these types of killings, Lindsay's behavior aligns closely with the motive of psychosis. While this doesn't automatically absolve someone with mental health symptoms of responsibility, in Lindsay's case, she did make an effort to seek treatment by voluntarily admitting herself to a mental health facility. It is clear that she was not ignoring her frightening symptoms. We recognize that Lindsay may have a strong case for being deemed psychotic and, therefore, not criminally responsible, but if this happens, it is crucial that she is kept in a secure facility for an extended period. Her behavior was unacceptable and devastating. No matter how this case plays out in court, we do hope for one outcome above all else: that Lindsay Clancy is no longer a threat to anyone. Considering this is a highly controversial case, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.